our 2-day sessions, or 2 days of sessions at Connected TV World Summit. This morning, we're going to kick off things with hopefully a bit of a leisurely breakfast session on Internet of Things and security. Yes. Is everyone's mic working? That's a.
Yes, it's working.
Yeah.
I can hear it working.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Thank you. Can you hear me now?
I think it's better.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Thanks a lot. Yeah. Okay. First of hopefully very few technical issues. So I'm Jonathan Broughton, and I'm an analyst at IHS Markit. But I'm not really here to talk to you about very much today. That's what my panelists are for. So yeah, we're here to talk about security and the Internet of Things. And to do a little bit of research for this, I decided not to go to my normal industry contacts, but in fact to take a trip downstairs to the basement where our IT security and tech people live. And I asked them, you know, we've recently upgraded to some quite high levels of security. I can't get to my emails without a fingerprint scanner and a second password. So we're pretty tight on security at IHS Markit, where knowledge is basically what we sell. And I asked them, so I'm doing this panel on the security in the Internet of Things. How do we approach Internet of Things security at IHS? And I was given a 4-word response, and the only word I can repeat back to you is mess. So needless to say, definitely a priority for IHS Markit going forwards. So first of all, I'd like to define what the Internet of Things is. It's a term that's used very broadly, and a lot of people, well, it's quite poorly understood when it's cast around quite a lot in the industry. And to help me explain this, I'm joined by my panelists. So I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and tell me why they're interested in the Internet of Things, and then we'll come back and define the problem. So if you'd like to start.
Start at this end?
Yes, please.
All right. My name's Steve Christian. Run the marketing team at Verimatrix, which many of you will know from this industry is a specialist in security for delivery of video to devices. So you may say, well, why are we on a panel related to the Internet of Things? Well, it's kind of my view from a strategic point perspective that a pay TV security system that delivers video and collects analytics has a lot of characteristics which sort of identify it really as a microcosm of the Internet of Things. So they're all connected devices, they all have some issues with security, there is security in communications and so on and so forth, and then there's cloud-based systems that feed them and manage them and control them. Sounds a lot like many of the Internet of Things applications that are emerging for anything from connected home to industrial applications, home health, and so on and so forth. So our interest really is to apply the techniques and capabilities and some of the partnerships that we've built up in 15 years nearly of working in the pay TV world, trying to apply that to new applications that potentially have very broad sort of business base in other kinds of markets. So that's really where Verimatrix is going in terms of its strategy.
Okay. My name is Sten Lawaetz. I work for TDC, which is the Danish largest telco. We have an interest in IoT and security because, as Steve said, we actually use Verimatrix for controlling our video delivery and the securing of that. But our end user devices and our end users have lots of IoT devices. The interesting thing with the term IoT is once it starts being an application, it stops being IoT, it starts being a set-top box or a personal assistant.
Making money.
Yeah, exactly. So we have two areas. One is that we have to coexist with all these devices which are in people's homes and are connected to our gateways or set-top boxes or exist in the same thing, but also that we will eventually start looking at how can we provide the same services that now is branded IoT, but at some point will be called something else, I think. So we need to step up the security aspect because we have the delivery of video covered fairly well, but it means that we have to exist in a world where there are potential threats all around.
Great, thank you.
Hi, I'm Praveen. I work with Broadcom. We are largest chipset provider for pay TV market. And I'm not currently working on IoT per se, but I've been in the security industry for the last 10 plus years. And all of the media coverage I see about IoT, I always get the feeling, oh, we solved this before. So that's my main area of interest. We have faced similar problems, and we have solved those problems. And there is a lot of commonalities. So that's why I believe that the pay TV technologies, they could be easily customized to suit in IoT market. And pay TV in itself is similar to that. It's also connected to internet. It's also talking things to other machines. So it's a similar sort of market.
Thank you.
So my name's Ken Munro, and I work for a company called Pentest Partners. We're a team of ethical hackers, or security researchers, if you like. And if you haven't seen what we do, you've probably seen some of our work. One of the most notable in this space was, it was us that discovered voice control on Samsung TVs that was passing voice data unencrypted over the internet. We've also done a lot of work on Android TV more recently, looking at the potential for malware being used to intercept things like audio. We work extensively in the Internet of Things. What is the IoT? Well, I think as the Security Foundation, we have an entire working group defining on what it is. But in my simple view, it's you take something, you put a NIC or a Wi-Fi module or a Bluetooth module, and you turn it into an internet thing. And unfortunately, that process doesn't always involve security, which is frankly what I dine out on.
Okay, good morning. My name's Shire. I'm here to represent the IoT Security Foundation during the day. I work for Infineon in the security business. And in the connected TV space, I mean, we've been delivering security devices into pay TV and the like for some 20 years or more. But with the connected platforms that we now have, the same issues as Ken's mentioned, we're seeing that people are assuming that just because they've connected their device, their T, their thing, to their Wi-Fi or whatever connectivity, it'll be secure because it said so. Maybe we have to do a bit more work. That's what we're here for.
Thank you. So what we're here for is to define a problem, to explain why it matters for you, why it matters that someone has access to the number of apples I have in my fridge. Is that a problem? So why it's a problem for individuals, why it's a problem for businesses, and to come up with some answers and hopefully some actionable recommendations for you guys. We're primarily here to answer your questions. This room is not fully packed, so if anyone has any questions at any time, please raise your hand, and we'll try and make it a bit more of an interactive session. And on that note, I'm going to start with a question to the audience. So we briefly defined Internet of Things in the panel just then. How many of you were listening? So what is the Internet of Things? I'm going to list some objects and test your knowledge. So start with something a bit more simple, a smartwatch. How many in this room, raise your hand if you think it's so, think that a smartwatch is part of the Internet of Things? Okay, yeah, good. How about a laptop, for example? Is that part of the Internet of Things? Okay, slightly fewer. And say something a bit more traditional. So this monitor here, is that part of the Internet of Things? How about my wireless credit card with a chip and pin device on it? Is that part of the Internet of Things? Or can it be? A bit more confusing. So I'm going to turn to the panel and ask them briefly. In your opinion, what is the Internet of Things? Where do we start defining it? Do we start with IP connectable devices like laptops and computers, and do we end it past things which are maybe not very smart at all, which are just devices which can be connected? How do we define the problem that we're facing? Who wants to start with that?
I'll take a shot at it if you like. I mean, I try and think of the application space that I can address with technologies that come from our company and as I said, partnerships that exist with organizations that have technology or software and hardware that help us to implement current products and potentially future products, right? I tend to think of the world of IP-enabled devices, directly IP-enabled devices. I have quarrels with people inside my own organization who like to think of Bluetooth devices or Zigbee devices and things like that as being part of the Internet of Things. I guess when you're in the analyst industry and you want to write a nice headline that says there'll be 1 trillion devices connected to the internet in 2020 or something like that, which is something you see quite frequently. I'm sure IHS wouldn't be guilty of such a gross miscalculation. But anyway, when you want to write a big headline, you tend to think about all of the things that could potentially be connected in any way, shape or form. I personally, just from trying to manage the space point of view, I tend to think of IP connected devices. And that could be gateways that connect to other devices, but IP technology and IP enabled kind of devices are the root of all of the things that I believe will be important in this space. So.
Okay. The panel largely agree with that definition? Nope.
Nope.
Ken.
Sorry, I don't wish to be controversial there.
I think that's why we're here, right? To be a bit controversial.
I completely take your point, and I agree that IP is probably the biggest issue we have. But I spend my time, frankly, buying stuff on Amazon and taking it apart. And we find that broadly, the IP bearer starts at the mobile phone. There are a few devices where there will be an IP bearer on the device itself, but by and large, so yesterday I was taking apart a robot lawnmower. No IP on the mower at all. It's got a Bluetooth module, a Wi-Fi module, and most of the comms are done over serial. So I see that device as very hackable. We pulled the firmware from it, we found security flaws on it, and we can take control of that device, and we'll be talking about that a bit later in the year. For me, that's an IoT device because it's got a Bluetooth module, a Wi-Fi module, it's running firmware, and it's got secrets on it that I can exploit. So I think, by and large, we need to look a little bit deeper than this. I completely accept your point. We don't need to go crazy because simple things like sensors, maybe not so interesting, but I think there are a lot of modules out there that go a bit further than just IP.
I think anything that connects directly or indirectly to internet. Interface does not matter. It doesn't have to be an IP interface. It could be Bluetooth. It could be some proprietary interface. It could be Zigbee. As long as it is accessing internet directly or indirectly, it is IoT because you can control it. And the final delivery media of IP does not matter.
I would agree. I think at the end of the day, if you can send a command from a remote IP connected device to another device, and how it gets there, whether it's by magic or technology, at the end of the day, if you can send a remote command over an IP network to a device and read from it, that's an IoT device. And what you have you're doing it with is probably another IoT device. I think the key factor is the T part. It is something often where it can be manipulated without any human intervention. Manipulated for good as well as bad, but because if one device can talk to another device remotely without any person involved, that's an IoT environment, and that's probably the dangerous part.
I would agree, but I think from my perspective, it's very much devices that are designed to talk to not just another device, but talk to something across potentially the internet. I have a remote control for my Windows. I can open and close that. I think it's digital, but it does not connect to the internet. So for me, it's very much about devices that will be designed in some way, have software that allows it to connect outside of sort of the near environment.
But as you say that, I came across a feature, I don't think it was available in the UK, but the new one of the car options, I think in the US, it has an option where you can get the car to talk to your garage door through the internet and remotely control it. And I was thinking, there's an opportunity. Closing the door just at the right time.
Yes.
Whether or not the car's there is another minor detail.
Okay, so I think they're largely a theme of how devices are connected rather than what the device does itself or anything like that. So method of connection, very important in defining our problem. The next part I'd like to jump into is probably something Ken's thought quite a lot about. So why do people care? Why you've taken apart a robot lawnmower? There's many examples, I'm sure you have, but why does someone want to do that? And why should you care? I mean, surely all they can do is mow your lawn for you rather than doing anything more dangerous than that. Why
yeah, well, in the case of the lawnmower, I'm thinking of a set of metal blades underneath it, doing a lot of RPM, a lot of potential there. A lot of the safety controls, for example, are digital. all go onto the same PCB, broadly controlled by the same controller. Fantastic. So there's lots of interesting things we can do there. But that's really just a point attack. It doesn't really do it for me. The sort of attacks that bother me are those that we saw, for example, over the weekend. Again, not really IoT, but previous to that, we saw Mirai, for example, the worm that took control of DVRs and CCTV cameras. And actually, there are much broader consequences to this. It's all very well going, yep, okay, so a bunch of people got DDoSed as a result of poor security on DVRs. I look at this a bit more broadly and go, well, hang on, most IoT devices consume a fair bit of power, particularly those for kettles, smart thermostats. If I can start to synchronize those as part of my botnet and turn them all on and off at the same time, I can start creating power spikes. I create power spikes, I can knock out bits of the grid. And that starts to become really concerning, because now I'm starting to destabilize a country. Maybe I want to do something to take out the grid, I don't know, on the day of an election perhaps. Or I wanted to soften up a country before we invaded. All of a sudden these are nation state problems created through power demands from hacking IoT things, whether it's smart TVs, kettles, thermostats, underfloor heating, you name it. We can start doing some really interesting things.
Yeah, so there's really two main aspects there. So it starts with something quite innocuous, taking control of something that's quite small. And you have the power to take down large organizations and even states. Does anyone have an opinion on how it affects the individual as well? So it's all well talking about businesses, and that is actually truly terrifying. But for an individual who may be more selfish, wants to know how that affects directly then.
Depends on the application space, right?
Yeah.
So we're talking about things like cameras and DDoS attacks and things like that. But if you translate over to, let's say, home health or something like that, I have a friend with a defibrillator, and that's connected to the internet connected in a sense, right? Every few days, and it gets reprogrammed, right? And you can imagine that if you had any doubts about the integrity of that connection or the data that was being fed to that device, you'd be pretty worried on a personal basis that something that was supposed to protect your health was not necessarily acting in your best interests anymore. So that can be a very, very narrow kind of issue. But really it revolves around, to me, the generalization is making sure that you can maintain the integrity of the endpoint devices, right? And in the case of the camera attack, Mirai, right, you said, and that it wasn't so much that the focus of the news story was the fact that these devices were being used to attack the DNS infrastructure of the internet, right? But the important point for me was that it was possible to take over those devices and pervert their operation, right? They weren't intended to be used in that way, and they certainly shouldn't be possible to reprogram them. But so the general conclusion is you're able to take over a device and undermine its integrity, undermine its functions, undermine what it is supposed to be doing, how it should be reporting data, how it might be taking action on receiving commands and things like that. So if you can't be totally assured of the integrity of the endpoint device, the thing in the Internet of Things, if you can't be assured of the integrity of that thing, then any application that's based on things, and that's broadly speaking the world of the IoT, right? Any application that's based on things will ultimately be in great jeopardy. So that's the way I come at the problem. So.
Okay, brilliant. So quite a serious problem, not just hackers in Russia counting the number of apples you have in your fridge. So making sure this is something that's personally affecting you, I'd like to ask another audience question. So how many of you have ever been the subject of a hack, an email address that's been compromised, a device that's been taken control? How many in the audience are confident that this has happened to them? So quite a lot of people here very confident in their security. All right, I won't follow that up with how many in the last 6 months. So yeah, leading up to this panel, I had a little browse on various security articles, Ken stuff to name one. And I had a look at unsecured devices or devices with lack security, which is something we'll come to in a second. And I stumbled across a website which basically has some little crawlers, and they go through, they iterate through IP addresses and import either no passwords or very, very basic default username and passwords. And it has a list of live camera feeds from 73,000 locations. Now, these aren't all just public cameras. These may be private cameras. They may be cameras in your house. And these aren't, just budget cameras. These are from Foscam, Linksys, Panasonic. So some big names there. Out of interest, how many people in the room own some sort of IP-connected security device? A connected doorbell, a security camera you've got in one room in your house, and have you configured all the security settings on that? Are you going to do that when you go home tonight? Are you still sure you've not been hacked? And that's a big theme. So one of the things I think we've learned from traditional security are a lot of what you can do is just with the basics. And a lot of that seems to be missing from devices on the Internet of Things. With that in mind, guys, you've worked in this area for a while. Let's go back to the basics of IT security and what hasn't been implemented on Internet of Things. What are the basic things that Internet of Things is missing? Who wants to take that?
It's simple. Testing.
Testing.
People test functionality. They test for safety. They get they'll get a safety mark. Or they'll get a compliance mark from if it's a CE mark, which of course it will be compliant to CE regulations. And then there's security, which they sort of go, well, we don't understand that, so it'll be okay. But they haven't tested it, and that's why Ken has a job.
Pretty much. It's quite interesting, actually, in terms of IoT for me, is that by and large, all the problems that are exposed out there, there's solutions to them. There's good practice out there, and I would strongly recommend you look at the Internet of Things Security Foundation guidance. It's really good. There's also great advice from the Open Web Application Security Project. It tells you how to fix all these problems. Yeah, there are a couple of bugs that haven't really been resolved, but if you follow the advice out there, you'll get a secure product to market. The problem is the lifespan of these devices. Your TV sits on your wall for a significant period of time. Your car, you own it for a long time. It has a long life cycle. Most of the entrepreneurs that are moving into IoT they're used to software, they're used to very short production processes, but now introducing hardware, which is quite difficult to maintain and keep up to date. So we're seeing huge market pressures and market forces, production life cycles getting in the way of doing security. If you do security at the beginning, if you think about security from day one, you'll have a secure device. But all too often it's tried to be stuffed in right at the end, and that's why insecure product gets to market.
So from this end of the panel, I think that we would say that, yeah, we've got the scars of all these kinds of issues, right?
Yeah, we've seen these before.
And worked together on solutions to them over many, many years. And yes, there is some experience there that is worth pointing to. One of the issues that has been we've evolved to over the course of many years is using hardware subsystems as a way to help to build foundations of security, things like secure boot and so on and so forth, right? But the other thing that is critically important, and Ken, you alluded to it, is the fact that you don't just do security once, you do it continuously over the life cycle of the devices and the application. So say it's not just for Christmas, right? It's not just when the device is first delivered or first designed, but you have to have in place a process or a specialist function that is able to do updates, to monitor for threats, to understand attack vectors, because those things evolve over time. It's an arms race, as we know from the video industry. Those things evolve over time. You have to have a response always ready. Otherwise, your application, again, is vulnerable. Your business stream, which is what you're trying to build out of these devices, is vulnerable. And those are the lessons that we've learned in the video industry. You guys probably want to comment a bit more on that. So,
yeah. So traditional security has always been in layers. So there are multiple layers of trust. You trust that the application that is running on the thing is what you want it, not what someone else loaded it. You trust that the data that it is storing about you is actually protected, And that's the level of trust. Then you trust that it is communicating to somebody and that is protected. And then there is a next level of trust that if something goes wrong, coming on the same line, that there is someone to take care of it. So there is an update mechanism. Someone is looking after the device. So there are multiple layers of trust in traditional model. Those are missing in IoT. And testing those trust and actually validating someone saying, yes, those trusts do exist is a significant part.
There's an added aspect or dimension of that is that we are used as an operator, television operator, to provide the electronics, and therefore we provide the update mechanism, and people trust in us to make the thing work. Whereas if you buy infrared cameras online from somewhere, Taiwan, I don't know, the manufacturer, who's that? I don't know. It was cheap, which means that in the IoT world, it's much easier to get stuff where you don't know actually what's in there. And I think there's an operating system of some form. I have no idea what it does. I don't take the things apart to find out what's in there, but people will buy IoT from untrusted vendors, if you like. But even trusted vendors like your television manufacturers and so forth, how good are they at security?
It's certainly improving to my mind, actually. The things I've seen over the last couple of years, I've seen, for example, implementation of Secure Boot, trusted key storage, which is fantastic to see it starting to happen. We've seen automatic updates starting to be pushed down to the consumer as well, which is great. But I think the one thing that many IoT manufacturers overlook is just how long they need to support these products for. I've got no issue with someone making a mistake in security. That's just not a problem. You can't be perfect, but you can fix it, and you can assure the customer that you're going to maintain and keep it secure over the life cycle of that product. And sometimes I think too many IoT manufacturers go, yeah, great, I've done that, I've built that, I've shipped it, now move on. Let's build 2.0, 3.0, forgetting that actually 1.0 needs supported for its entire life cycle.
Do you believe that's always going to be the responsibility of the device manufacturer? Where would you point for that responsibility?
Point that to Chris, I think.
I think it's a good point. It may not be the manufacturer, it may be the supplier, whether it's an operator, it might be the retailer. I mean, it's an opportunity if they actually take the idea of building a relationship with the client. I mean, they'll quite, if you buy a piece of equipment from a online or high street store, they'll happily sell you an extended guarantee and take the money. But in principle, it's why not have an extended service support package, which includes security updates. People feel more comfortable with insurance if they know they'll be looked after. Not everybody will do it, you're quite right. And a lot of people will just buy and forget. But I think mostly, as we find we are living in this connected world, we feel that we want to be looked after.
So I tend to think about this in a follow the money sense, right? Now, your context of that answer, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but your context was kind of like building a home security system out of stuff you buy in DIY stores and so on and so forth, and putting it together and managing it yourself. Obviously, there's another level to that market, which is people like ADT and so on, who will come in and install a system and monitor it for you and so on and so forth. Now, that seems to be the kind of ecosystem where there's a stream of business running for a very long time, and sufficient stream business to be able to support the kind of security issues that would be appropriate to be able to guarantee the service level that, I'm using ADT as an example here, but the service level that ADT professes to offer, right? So that when you stand back and look at IoT, it's not the fact that it's very, very clever to be able to connect A to B or something like that. It's the business that kind of thing can enable.
Absolutely.
And if you can see applications with a business stream that has the right kind of lifetime envelope, you can understand where the responsibility for security starts to come from, which is the reason I asked the question.
I mean, the classic example that is, I recently bought, well, a few months ago, I bought a printer and some ink cartridges. I thought it was a good idea. The ink cartridges cost more than the printer. But in terms of IoT, when the ink cartridges were running short, the printer informed me, would I like to buy some more from its store? And I'm thinking, whoa, I didn't ask for that. But it's a service, it's offering an IoT connection that Thank goodness I haven't loaded my credit card into the printer. But that's only one small step away. And perhaps that's a good service. People do like that convenience, and they'll pay for the convenience. They will pay for convenience, I'm certain of that. And security, they like that warm, fuzzy feeling.
That's one type of service model actually, but we definitely need to look at the business model of it. If the manufacturer incentive is in selling you new devices, they will sell you new devices. They have no incentive to update the firmware after 1 year. But if there is some kind of service model where they can make regular money, like in pay TV market, operators make money month after month. ADT model, they make money month after month. So we need that type of service model, and people are accustomed to it. People are paying for service on their cars. They will pay for it, but it need to be an incentive for the manufacturer also to provide those services. Those will not come for free. And consumers need to ask for that. Probably there will be some manufacturer which will come, okay, we will give you this TV, which is guaranteed 7 years software, but you need to pay extra for that. And once the management get that extra funding, they can put a team aside for maintenance. But if they make more money in selling you a new product, they will find all the ways. They will make your software obsolete. They will make your battery die out fast. They will find all sort of ways to make you buy a new product.
Sure. But I mean, I'm of the age, I remember when people used to rent TVs. Of course, they weren't connected at the time, except to the electricity on a good day. But I can see in the future, people will come up with a business model where, like the printer, you'll have a very low upfront cost to acquire the IoT device, the TV or whatever it happens to be, and then pay for the service. And if you don't pay for the service, they'll send a kill command. Hopefully, you'll get the kill command from the right people.
Yeah, there's a whole class of applications emerging, not in the home space, but in the industrial space, right? Where you turn what used to be a capital acquisition of, let's say, a water pump or something like that, right? You turn that into a service business, right? And the amount that you pay on a monthly basis is related to the amount of water you pump, for instance, right? Again, you're seeing this in context. There's a device there, and you have to rely on the measurement capabilities that device is reporting, X gallons or something like that. If you didn't have a trust in the integrity of that device, then your business would be shot, right? But it starts to create a stream of cash that incentivizes you to A, take care of security in the first place, and B, to maintain that security over the life cycle of that application. So that's a sort of classic example of where you can see the need for security is much more than just lip service, and there's an actual business stream that can support the real actions you need to take in order to maintain the integrity of that kind of business application.
So part of the theme there seems to be that the actual business models of what is still quite a nascent market is focused around sort of sell and forget. I think that was mentioned on our call earlier in the week. Companies producing quite interesting devices, getting some consumer interest out of it, selling it, and then moving on to the next thing. This works fine for non-established brands, but we know that customers do value their security. They may not be completely understand what it means or how security is implemented, but they do know that if their credit card details, for example, are stolen from a service they subscribe to, that it's incredibly damaging for a business and it takes a lot of time to get back. So there's sort of three parties involved there. We've got consumers themselves, we've got the people providing the product or the service, and we've got governments and organisations which are created to protect the consumer, who may in fact not be that well educated. How much, where do the responsibilities of this lie? Does it lie with the consumer themselves? Does it lie with the business who's trying to make produce revenue off clever ideas that they have? Or does it in fact lie with governments and organisations whose responsibility is to protect their citizens or their members, or otherwise be helpful in this industry space?
Well, there's a good example. Over the weekend, a government-related organisation had a small problem with some ransomware. You may have noticed this. I think they spend a probably 9-figure sum on IoT, on security a year, one place or another, and it obviously worked nearly all the time. It wasn't your operational mine that was delayed, I assume. You can't rely on government to do things because they're just people. I think, and the way I put it, a simple one, anybody left their car door open this morning? No. Anybody left their front door open this morning? We used to do things like that. Okay. Anybody not changed their Wi-Fi router password recently? Why? It's not hard. But you've left a small window open there, potentially.
It's true.
So I think
Why do you say that? Because I also don't change the lock of my front door every year.
But you've changed it once, and you haven't left the key on the mat outside.
True.
So why would you do any other way? It's just what we get used to. I mean, I will be honest and say, if I go back a couple of generations, I talk to my forebears and say, to them, they used to leave their front doors open. And I'm going, what? Because they could trust everybody in the village or the town they lived. I'm sure you've seen the movies of sort of 1950s and 60s, particularly from America, where people used to park a car and they didn't lock it. And you're thinking, that's not happening. But it happens. It used to happen. So we're just a question of getting used to it. And I think that will it might take another generation. And then people say, hey, do you know something? I've just forgotten. I nearly must change the password again.
I think also it's a matter of the business model that we're talking about. If we do the ADT thing, then I trust ADT to come and
Change
make
the
sure
passwords.
everything works and is secure. If I buy things off Amazon, install it myself, then it's actually perhaps more my responsibility rather than, oh, I thought the manufacturer did everything for me. It's a little bit who
do you trust?
Yes.
There's two distinct domains, right? As they're interrelated, but the two distinct domains are the devices themselves, right? And then the cloud environment that communicates with those devices and potentially stores data from those devices. And I think that you can imagine attacks coming in either of those two places. The classical, attack on credit card data and things like that is an attack on the infrastructure of the cloud that supports data gathering and so on. And there's obviously plenty of government action, or at least hot air, being applied to data that's being accumulated and stored on behalf of consumers. Apparently on behalf of consumers anyway. Probably less attention on the security of the devices that support and collect that data. And there's plenty of examples, not just of attacks on devices, of course, but attacks on the streams of data that are flowing backwards and forwards from those devices, and how casually people have tried to protect those kinds of things. So.
Well, I was saying, you look at the pay TV sector, which I think we've all been involved with in one way or over the years, and that's learnt over the years. In many years ago, it was people were splicing cables. Then they got round to hacking the keys for cards and so forth. Now, of course, IPTV is with us everywhere, and of course, that's completely secure.
Until it isn't.
Until it isn't. Then what do we do?
Well, that's why we have people like us, of course. Right?
I think there's an interesting point there actually about pay TV. Because over the last 20, 30 years, actually, the security of the systems to prevent fraud, to prevent theft of data, uses almost exactly the same techniques that you might use to secure IoT. So strong cryptography, strong key storage, strong provisioning.
Because there was a business at stake which needed to be protected, right?
Yeah,
and there's also an arc of different, the story you're telling about splicing cables and then moving on to smart cards and things like that, that's the arc of the protection mechanisms that we use to assure the revenue streams of those particular businesses at that time, right? And as soon as the type of attack was discovered, there was a remedy for that type of attack, and we tried to apply it. And that's a 25-year story, right? More or less.
Yep.
Anyone who's been in the business knows the transitions that have happened and are still happening. So yes, that's where the lessons I was alluding to in the sort of first answer come from, is our continuous application of skills in the hardware domain and in the software domain to try and maintain and enhance revenue for the business of delivery of video. So
pay TV has a different business model. It's a central authority maintaining it. So it's the manufacturer or the operator maintaining it. IoT is more fragmented. So here we need the traditional security model of layers. So I understand consumer need to be aware of it. They need to set the password. But then there are other players also who need to be careful. Manufacturer also need to ensure there is correct security. The traditional lock model. Lock does not prevent thief from coming inside your house. It only is there to prevent an honest person turning into a thief. And there is government which is ensuring law and order is there, so that there is a fear that you don't break into anybody's. Lock does not protect your house. That's one of the things that protect your house. So manufacturer need to be there. Then the infrastructure provider, ISPs have a responsibility. All those denial of services attack, ISPs can easily spot those things. They have all the tools. They can stop those things. And with such a fragmented model, there will be bad players. So we need all the layers. And we need government intervention as well. It's not that the government is totally off the hook. We need stuff like Data Protection Act, which applies to all small and large businesses. It should come down to these things as well, that if you're collecting my personal data, you have some responsibility how you're protecting it. So if that comes down to this, plus things like your warranty, you can return things if you buy from distance within 30 days. Government ensures that. So government can enforce that if there is a thing which has a lifespan of 8 years, you need to ensure that you provide updates for 4 years. Government can introduce those sort of things, and we need all of that.
There is actually there are some good things happening. So in the UK, for example, we have a couple of government initiatives that are working on this very hard. So a secure by default program that's being pushed across multiple departments, so that the product that lands on the consumer's wall or desk is secure by default, which is a great start. Problem is, government takes a long time to do this. Regulation will take forever to actually come into effect. So I think in the meantime we need some education, but we also need some litigation as well. And I was really pleased to see there have been a few very interesting lawsuits over the last few months. Unfortunately, the example I'm going to give is one involving a sex toy. You probably saw WeVibe settled out of court for just under 4 million Canadian.
Fascinating story. Yes.
Yeah, and again, but actually, what the litigation was around, it was excessive gathering of user data. It collected rather more than it was supposed to. So users' behavioural habits with the sex toy, and then a bunch of location data and personal data. So you could put that all together and find out who's doing what with who, which probably wasn't a great way to keep your privacy secret. But we're starting to see lawsuits. We've seen FTC complaints. So we had one about Asus not supporting a consumer router. They've now agreed to support a router for 20 years, which is great. And we've seen a couple more FTC complaints. One, I think it was with Bose or Sennheiser, I can't remember the exact one, but around personal data being used in smart headphones. Was it Bose? Right, okay. And that one's going through at the moment, so it'll be fascinating to see where that comes out. So there is a lot of progress in this space, but I think actually by design, by default, following good practice, learning from, frankly, what pay TV have had to go through over the last 25 years, that's a really good way forward. So education, litigation, and a bit of regulation to boot.
There's an added aspect, again, on the manufacturer's responsibility for making things, I would say, making them simple. There is no need to gather all the data you can just because you can. Yeah. And the same thing, my refrigerator has a web server built in. Why? Because it's the easiest thing. You just stick a Linux on it and everybody's happy. They do too many things, perhaps. And you also, if you want to maintain a router for 20 years, the guy who wrote the software is probably dead by then. You need to be able to maintain simple. This is the same thing we learn from pay TV. The operating systems we run on our CPE devices are very simple and old-fashioned, and people say, why is it so old-fashioned? Because it works. It's secure. We know what it does and doesn't do.
But the thing, I think this is the problem. We're in a consumer society now where we buy things and throw them away when they don't work because you can't find anybody to fix them. But we are not taking the understanding of saying, well, if I bought this connected device and it's got all my useful information in there because I find it convenient, what do I do when I throw it away? Where does my personal data go? If it's stored in the device, will it go with it? I mean, you hear of people taking apart old PCs and stripping the hard drive and getting all the personal data off of that. That perhaps is going to happen with your IoT device if you don't know what it's storing. And I think that's half the battle. We don't know what it's doing. And I think that has to be displayed somewhere, maybe in a cloud. But you need to know what you've got in your hand, so to speak.
Good points there. I think a lot of what we've been talking around is perhaps quite abstract for the average person. To bring it sort of back to something we can all grasp on, I'd like to ask a little bit around about how attacks actually take place. So we can talk about people getting your data, people getting control of your Jeep or whatever, or your lawnmower. But how does that actually happen? What protocols do people have to breach to get that? How easy is it for someone to take control of a device without your permission? Anyone want to take that?
Okay, I'll give a couple of recent examples. Your point about the fridge was fantastic. One of the things we did 2 years ago now is we stole a set of Wi-Fi keys from a smart fridge. We're actually working on another one as of yesterday. It was ridiculously easy. Just turned out that the SSL connection didn't validate the certificate authority, so you can man-in-the-middle it and steal the Wi-Fi keys and Wi-Fi passwords. My seminal work 3 years ago was on a Wi-Fi kettle. It was ridiculously easy. You just needed the pin for the chipset, which was 6 zeros, and I've got your Wi-Fi key. It's so easy, it's ridiculous. It's very rare we need to go to the point of getting out logic probes and pulling firmware off chips, but we do, because it's more challenging and more fun. It should be so much harder than this. It is improving, don't get me wrong, there is definite progress, but so often we'll go out and buy a consumer device from Amazon or wherever and find within 5 minutes we've got personal data out of the thing.
In the Internet Things Security Foundation, we tried to come up with a security checklist of what people should do to check their products are secure. Out of curiosity, I was looking to find other people's checklists for security, and I found one. There is, in fact, more than one. There are a couple of websites written by hackers on how to check to see if the product is insecure. And it gives you a list of things to try. And it's very informative. I mean, it's a how-to of almost any, well, depending on they have a number of different checklists for a number of different platforms, and it's all sitting there on the net if you want to try and hack your neighbour's things. And I'm thinking, I'm sure there are probably some 12-year-olds who are probably doing this just for fun. And that's the point is they may not be on your street, they may be somewhere else in the world. And that's the scary part. There are ways of doing it, menus of how to do it, tools available for free. That's why we need security, I think.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, sorry.
I think it's the recent problems that we have seen in IoT spaces with defaults and hard coding things, and in some of the cases not even giving user the ability to change. And a lot of the things we also have been to not knowing what the secret is. So your smart lock sending the key in clear to the lock from your phone, that is a secret, and if you know it is secret, you need to protect it. So people are not even paying attention to what is secret. Same for your video camera feed. That is your personal data, that's secret. If that is encrypted at source, even if you access the video camera, you can't see what is there. So it's classification of what is secret and maintaining it like that is lost today.
I mean, I would question for the audience, anybody got a connected device in their hand? Anybody not running a VPN on it? We'd just like to identify the targets now, thank you. And if you're not running your VPNs over your mobiles and laptops and so on, You might ask the question, why not?
All right, we've got about 10 minutes left. So in a moment, I'm going to go for audience questions. So if you have anything, I will come back to you. If you have anything at all still, please stick your hand up and we'll come to you, but I will leave a small slot at the end. So I did promise also that at the end of this session, we'd have some actionable recommendations for you. We've talked a lot about what's wrong, who it affects, what can go wrong, why you should care about it. But what should the industry do? We talked a little bit around sort of legislation, litigation, best practice, and who's responsible for it. But for actionable recommendations for the user, actionable recommendations for the business, and actionable recommendations for foundations such as your foundation, what should we be doing next? We've got some lessons from the past, definitely from pay TV. So perhaps one of the actionable recommendations for our audience should be go ask your local pay TV guys. But for the panel, what actionable recommendations would you make to those three groups?
So I mean, I approach it very much as an analogy to the business we're currently in, right? So the recommendation for anyone who's running a business based on a network of devices is to take a look at some of the recommendations that are coming out of organizations, but also have somebody who is specifically tasked with implementation of I'll say a certification program, but basically implementation of a regime that will check security initially and maintain security over the life cycle of the business. So there's clearly going to be companies that emerge in that space to actually take on those kinds of responsibilities. Maybe we're one of them, right? But there'll be many others, I'm sure. But that's the kind of thing that if you're setting up a business that's based on a network of devices, and that's really what the I suppose the opportunity space really looks like, right? Then you'll need to actually pay attention to this specifically as a sub part of your business. So
I think for the business side as well, it's important that you have to recognize that there is a security aspect, and you have to do worst case, some analysis at least of saying what could go wrong, and assume that it probably will go wrong, and have some sort of approach to rectify this if it does go wrong. So rather than just happy-go-lucky, well, it never rains, everything's fine, really actually be a bit pessimistic about how things will work and what might break. We do that, and your company sells software that does this simply because we've been there, we've learnt this. We have to do it. Otherwise, it's a bit too optimistic.
For me, on the consumer side, change all the defaults that you get with your device, and do not skimp on price for your products. If you feel that some product is giving you security, some product is saying that we guarantee that the day you buy, your phone will get updates for next 2 years, buy that compared to the cheaper one. So pay for the security. Someone need to pay for it. That's how it will come into the system. For the manufacturer side, I've seen some good examples and implement design level security. And I don't mean software level. Some of the things we discussed previously, like there is a camera company in US which makes a camera with privacy mode with a physical shutter on it. So even if someone cracks into your webcam, they can't see through it because there is a privacy camera. Amazon claims, no one has verified so far, that when you mute their Echo device, the red LED turns on, and that is electrically linked to power of your microphone. So no one can bypass that. If you can see that red thing, that means your microphone is definitely not powered on. No one has verified it, but they say so. Let's trust until someone breaks it. So there are some simple things like that. And on sensor type devices, you can have blinking things showing that this is now communicating. Your laptop can show when it is recording. Apple tried it, but people still managed to bypass that LED. But it can be done in electronics. It's not an impossible thing. So if you think for simple, secure solutions, they can bypass all those things. And So I'll recommend that.
So I want to echo a couple of points here. I think if you bake in security really early on in your design life cycles, you're going to be in a much, much better place than trying to strap it on later down the line. It'll cost you a lot of money to try and retrofit security. It's very difficult, it's very awkward. Bake it in early, ask those difficult questions early on, you'll be in a whole different place. One thing that concerns me going forward is starting to see a degree of polarization of TV operating systems. So no one was really interested in the security of mobile phones from my perspective until we started to see Android and iOS start to polarize. And all of a sudden it was worthwhile researchers spending time. Now we're starting to see TVs moving towards Android. We know Android security inside out. The same attacks that work on phones and tablets now work on the telly. The same malware works on your phone, works on your telly, works on your Android watch. So that's what I'd be really aware of, is as we start to see some polarization, be really, really aware of the security issues that affect one implementation, one use to a smart TV.
I would say just to echo perhaps what other people have said, if you work for an organisation or you talking to an organisation as a supplier, they've probably got health and safety regulations and policies in place. They've probably got IT security. The question is, do they have product and service security procedures in place? And can I read them, please? And as mentioned earlier, who's responsible? At the end of the day, it's going to be the board that is going to get litigated, and he's going to have to pay or go to jail, which is not very pleasant as far as I understand. So there's always some incentive processes, but the people need to be aware that if they're not secure, it's going to cost physically. At the consumer level, I think, as Parveen said, one of the issues is if I buy something, I always check the sort of reviews of people who said, "Oh, this is a great product. It works wonderfully." When I do the odd review, I like to include the word, and I check the security, and it seems to be okay. That's about as far as I can go. I don't have all the facilities that Ken has, but looking for that confirmation that somebody else has checked the security device should become second nature, but it'll take time.
Okay, thank you. So, design with security in mind, security in layers, think about hardware, education, and learn from lessons of the past. Trust your pay TV operators. We've talked a lot about what can go wrong in Internet of Things, but it's quite an exciting area. There's a hell of a lot of applications which make our lives better, safer and more healthy. So I think at all times when we talk about security, it's important to bear in mind that there's a benefit to these devices as well. Maybe we should look at the cost to that benefit, but there's always a benefit associated with this. We've got a couple of minutes, so if there are any burning audience questions, I'd like to go to them now. If you're willing at all. Too tired, it is before 9 o'clock still. Yes, thank you.
Just about you touched on the issue of who's responsible for security on the IoT.
Yeah.
And I just wondered if you could extend that to breaches. When breaches occur, might consumers be responsible for their own devices if they've been used as part of an attack? Or?
If a device that I own is used to attack a business, am I responsible for it?
Yeah.
That's a great question. I'll let the panel answer it.
Depends which legislative area you're in, because I suspect if the device in question is a 10-ton truck, you might be held responsible. If it's a light bulb, perhaps not. And on the other hand, there are some amazing people talking about how they're going to regulate everything in certain geographic areas, and that will prove interesting. You might be held responsible if you happen to have the wrong light bulb in the wrong territory. I'm joking.
Because you might be more likely to pay for security if you know you're going to. Yeah.
Probably, or you might just switch the damn thing off.
I think there is a degree of responsibility the consumer needs to take, but the challenge we've got is right now consumers see the security as someone else's problem. And the fact that they've set their password for their device or the account on the cloud they own as password, they don't perceive that to be their problem. It's your problem. And as a result, that's why we have the website Have I Been Pwned, which has got huge sets of user data. Everyone's got the password or something similarly rubbish. So there is a degree of responsibility for the consumer, but by and large, I think it is more responsibility in terms of the service provider, the back-end service provider, the manufacturer that actually looks after the cloud-based system that does all the communication with the IoT device. A couple of good examples of that: Cloud Pets, really poorly written cloud-based application, really insecure kid's doll, got breached, but actually the reason most accounts got breached was because the consumers had set this password that was advised by the manufacturer. So I think it was something like QAZX and the first 3 rows of characters on the keyboard. So whose fault was it? Very difficult to attribute.
Okay, thank you. It is just 1 minute past 9, which brings us to the end of my panel. Thank you very much to the panelists, and thank you very much for listening.